Story 1. A Cave Diver's Descent into Terror. The cave called to me long before I understood its pull. Conky Hole, a murky spring tucked deep in the Pennsylvania wilderness, was a name whispered among divers like a forbidden secret. They said it was tied to an old Lenape tale about a lover who dove into its depths, only to vanish, leaving nothing but a pool of blood miles downstream. My brother Ethan was obsessed with it. He'd talk about the siphon, a cave where the current drags you deeper, fighting every instinct to pull you toward the surface. It's the ultimate test, he'd say, his eyes glinting with a hunger I didn't share but couldn't resist. We weren't supposed to be there. Conky Hole was off limits, its entrance gated and patrolled after too many divers disappeared. But Ethan had a way of bending rules and people to his will. He'd found a map, a tattered thing from some old forum marked with coordinates and cryptic warnings. Stay on the line, don't trust the light. I thought it was nonsense. But Ethan was already packing our gear, tanks, reels, lights, knives. "We're ready," he said, tossing me a dry suit. "Advanced open water certs, years of dives. We've got this." I nodded, ignoring the knot in my stomach. The spring was hidden in a tangle of pines, its surface a dark mirror reflecting the overcast sky. The air smelled of damp earth and something sharper, like iron. Ethan was already suiting up, his movements quick and precise, while I fumbled with my regulator, my fingers clumsy with nerves. "You good?" he asked, not looking up. I mumbled a yes, clipping the guideline reel to my belt. The line was our lifeline, a thin thread to guide us back through the labyrinth. Without it, you were as good as dead. We slipped into the water, the cold biting through our suits. My light cut a narrow beam through the murk, illuminating sediment that swirled like smoke. The entrance loomed below, a jagged maw in the rock, barely wide enough for one diver. Ethan went first, his fins kicking up clouds of silt as he disappeared. I followed, the current tugging at me, gentle at first, like a hand coaxing me deeper. The silence was absolute, broken only by the hiss of my regulator and the faint hum of the siphon pulling us in. The tunnel was tight, the walls rough under my gloves. My light danced across limestone carved by centuries of water, smooth and slick as bone. Ethan's silhouette moved ahead, steady and sure, his line unspooling behind him. I checked my dive computer. 40 feet down, air steady. Everything was calm, almost beautiful. The cave felt alive, its walls pulsing with the current's rhythm. I could see why Ethan was drawn to this. There was a strange allure to the dark, to the places no one else dared go. At 80 feet, the tunnel widened into a chamber. My light caught something strange, a cluster of pale, translucent shapes clinging to the ceiling. They were shrimp-like, but massive, their bodies as long as my arm, their legs twitching in the current. I froze, my breath loud in my ears. Ethan turned, his light sweeping over them, and I saw his eyes widen behind his mask. He signaled to keep moving, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they were watching us, their eyeless heads tilting as we passed. We pushed deeper, the current growing stronger, pulling at my fins. My dive computer beeped 100 feet. We were burning through air faster than planned. I tapped Ethan's shoulder, signaling to check our gauges, but he shook his head and pointed forward. "One more chamber," he signaled. I hesitated, the weight of the cave pressing in, but followed. He was my brother after all. The next chamber was vast, the walls lost in darkness beyond our lights. The current was a force now, dragging us like leaves in a storm. My light caught more of those creatures, dozens of them, skittering along the wall, their long, segmented bodies glinting like wet ivory. They were bigger here, some as long as a car, their claws snapping in the water. Ethan's light jerked wildly as he spun, his regulator bubbling faster. I grabbed his arm, signaling to turn back, but he shook me off, his eyes locked on something deeper in the chamber. That's when I saw it, a flicker of movement, too large, too fast. It wasn't one of the creatures. It was something else, something that didn't belong. A shape, humanoid but wrong, darted through the edge of my light. My heart slammed against my ribs. I signaled frantically, "Go back, now!" But Ethan was already swimming deeper, chasing whatever he'd seen. The line tugged taut between us, and I had no choice but to follow or lose him. At 130 feet, the cave narrowed again, the walls closing in like a vice. The current was relentless, pulling us into a tunnel so tight I had to angle my shoulders to fit. My light caught Ethan's fins ahead, kicking hard against the flow. The creatures were everywhere now, their claws scraping the walls, their bodies lunging through the water. One brushed past me, its leg grazing my suit, cold and sharp as a blade. I screamed into my regulator, the sound muffled by the water. Then the line went slack. My stomach dropped. I shone my light ahead. Ethan was gone. The guideline floated loose, severed, drifting in the current. Panic clawed at me. I kicked forward, my light sweeping the tunnel, but there was no sign of him. The creatures were closing in, their movements faster, more deliberate. I saw one lunge, its claws snapping inches from my face. I swung my knife, the blade glancing off its shell, and kicked backward, my tanks scraping the walls. The tunnel tightened further, barely wider than my shoulders. I was hyperventilating, my air dwindling as the dive computer beeped warnings. I had to find Ethan, but the creatures were relentless, their bodies filling the tunnel behind me. I ditched my tanks, the weight dragging me down, and squeezed into a crack so narrow my chest burned as I forced myself through. The current pulled harder, threatening to trap me forever. My light flickered, the battery dying, and for a moment I was blind in the dark. The only sound my ragged breathing and the scrape of claws. Then I saw it, a faint glow ahead. Not my light, not Ethan's, but something else. A pale, sickly light that pulsed like a heartbeat. I crawled toward it, my arms aching, my lungs screaming. The tunnel opened into a small chamber, and there was Ethan, floating motionless, his light dead, his regulator drifting from his mouth. I grabbed him, shaking him, but his eyes were vacant, staring past me. The light wasn't coming from him. It was coming from the walls, where thousands of those creatures clung, their bodies glowing faintly, their claws twitching in unison. I didn't think. I grabbed Ethan's arm and pulled, kicking toward the glow. The current fought me, but I was stronger, driven by terror and the need to get out. The creatures followed, their claws snapping, but the tunnel widened, and I saw a shaft of daylight piercing the water. Real daylight, not the sickly glow of the cave. I dragged Ethan with me, my arms burning, my air gone. My vision blurred, spots dancing in my eyes, but I kicked harder, the light growing brighter. We broke the surface, gasping on a desolate lakeshore miles from the spring. Ethan coughed, spitting water, his eyes unfocused but alive. I collapsed beside him, my chest heaving, the cave's cold still clinging to my skin. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. The horrors we'd seen, the creatures, the shape in the dark, the pull of the siphon were etched into us. We sat there, shivering in the sunlight, the cave's secrets buried beneath the earth. I knew one thing for certain. I'd never dive again. Story 2. The Disappearance of Ben McDaniel. My name is Ben McDaniel, and this is the story of how I disappeared into the depths of Vortex Spring, a tale that will chill you to the bone. It was August 18th, 2010, a sweltering summer evening in the Florida Panhandle, the kind where the air clings to your skin like a second wetsuit. Vortex Spring, a sprawling freshwater diving site near Ponce de Leon, was my sanctuary, a place where I could escape the weight of my crumbling life. My business had collapsed. My savings were gone. My younger brother's death still haunted my dreams, and the IRS was hounding me for debts I couldn't pay. The clear, 68-degree waters of the spring were my only solace, a place where I could dive into silence and forget the chaos above. But that night, the spring had other plans for me. I'd been diving at Vortex for months, drawn to its underwater cave system, a labyrinth of limestone tunnels plunging 115 feet below the surface, accessible only to certified cave divers. I wasn't one of them. My open water certification was all I had, earned when I was 15, practicing in my family's pool back in Memphis. But I was no stranger to the cave's entrance, a 9 by 12-foot maw at 58 feet deep, guarded by a locked gate to keep out the untrained. I'd learned to pick that lock, slipping through when no one was watching. It was reckless, I know, but the cave called to me, its darkness promising answers I couldn't find on land. That evening, around 7:30 p.m., the sun was dipping low, casting long shadows across the spring's basin. I'd already done one dive earlier, studying the cave's entrance, sketching its contours in my dive log. I filled my aluminum AL-80 tanks at the dive shop, their weight reassuring against my sides in my homemade side mount rig, my VR3 dive computer, a pricey piece of tech I'd splurged on, blinked ready. I checked my gear twice. Mask, fins, wetsuit, helmet, lights. Everything was in place. I called my mom from the parking lot, her voice warm but worried, asking when I'd be home. "Soon," I said, not knowing it was a lie. At the water's edge, I slipped into the spring, the coolness swallowing me whole. The basin was alive with carp, gliding like ghosts, their scales glinting in my flashlight's beam. I descended, the pressure building in my ears until I reached the cave's entrance. 2 employees, Chuck Cronin and Eduardo Turan, were there, finishing their own dive. They knew me, knew I wasn't certified for this. Eduardo's eyes narrowed as he saw me near the gate, my fingers already working the lock. I'd done it before, and they'd caught me at it. This time, though, Eduardo didn't stop me. Maybe he was tired of arguing, or maybe he figured it was safer to let me through than risk me getting stuck breaking in. He unlocked the gate, gave me a nod, and swam up with Chuck. I was alone. The cave opened before me, a jagged throat of rock and shadow. The guideline, a rope tethered to the entrance for navigation, stretched into the darkness. I clipped my reel to it, my lights cutting through the crystal water. The tunnel was tight, barely 10 inches wide in places, forcing me to twist my body and push my tanks ahead. My heart pounded, not from fear but from the thrill. I was mapping this place, my own secret project, marking passages no one else dared to explore. My dive log, tucked in my truck above, held sketches of tunnels I swore didn't exist on any official map. At 115 feet, the cave narrowed, the walls pressing in like a vice. My VR3 beeped, warning me to watch my gas mix. Too much nitrogen at this depth could narc me, cloud my mind. I switched regulators, balancing the oxygen and nitrogen between my tanks. The silence was absolute, broken only by the hiss of my breath and the faint scrape of my gear against limestone. I pushed deeper, following a faint current, my lights catching glints of quartz in the walls. Then I saw it, a crevice, barely a foot wide, branching off the main tunnel. My maps had hinted at it, a passage no one else had marked. I unclipped from the guideline, a reckless move, and squeezed inside. The crevice was a coffin of stone, so tight I had to exhale to fit. My tanks clanged against the rock, my lights flickering as silt clouded the water. I should have turned back, but something urged me on, a whisper in my mind, not my voice, telling me to keep going. The passage widened slightly, opening into a small chamber, no bigger than a closet. My beam swept across it, revealing nothing but smooth walls and a faint shimmer in the water, like a mirage. I checked my VR 3-20 minutes in, air dwindling. I needed to head back. That's when I felt it, a tug, like a hand on my fin. I spun, my light slashing through the murk. But there was nothing, just the cave, silent and still. My pulse raced, my breath shallow. I kicked toward the crevice, but the water seemed thicker, resisting me. Another tug, stronger, on my tank. I twisted, my helmet scraping the ceiling, and saw a shadow, human-shaped, fleeting, dart behind a rock. My heart stopped. No one else was down here. I was alone, wasn't I? Panic clawed at me, but I forced it down. I pushed through the crevice, my tanks catching, my body scraping raw against the rock. The guideline was gone, snapped or unclipped, I couldn't tell. My VR3 beeped frantically, air running low. I swam blind, my lights dimming, the cave's walls closing in. The shadow was back, moving in the corner of my eye, always just out of reach. It wasn't a diver. It wasn't human. Its edges blurred like it was part of the water itself, watching me. I don't know how long I swam, minutes or hours, my mind fogging from nitrogen narcosis. The cave seemed to shift, tunnels twisting where they hadn't before. I found a guideline, maybe the same one, maybe not, and followed it, praying it led out. My air was nearly gone, my chest tight. The shadow followed closer now, its presence heavy, like a weight on my back. I reached the gate, still open, and kicked for the surface, my lungs burning. But the surface never came. The water grew darker, colder, the basin's familiar glow gone. I was still in the cave somehow, the guideline looping back on itself. My VR3 was dead, my lights failing. The shadow was everywhere now, a formless mass filling the water, whispering my name in bubbles that weren't mine. I screamed into my regulator, the sound muffled as the cave swallowed me whole. Above, the world moved on. 2 days later, my truck was still in the parking lot, my wallet, phone, and dive log inside. The Holmes County Sheriff's Office was called, and the search began. 16 of the world's best cave divers, Ed Sorensen, Jill Heinert, Mike Young, scoured every inch of Vortex Springs' 1,642 feet of mapped tunnels. They found my tanks near the entrance, oddly placed, filled with air instead of the gas mix I'd need for deep diving. No scratches on the walls, no disturbed silt, no body. Cadaver dogs sniffed the water, but tests for decomposition were inconclusive. A remotely operated vehicle probed the depths. Nothing. My dive log showed maps of passages that didn't exist, sketches of a crevice no one could find. My parents offered a $30,000 reward, but when another diver died searching for me, they rescinded it. The diving community outraged. Theories swirled. Some said I drowned, my body wedged in an unreachable crevice. Others thought I staged it, fleeing my debts and grief, leaving my truck and dog behind. A private investigator hired by my family pointed to foul play, hinting at the dive shop's shady owner, Lowell Kelly, who'd beaten an employee with a bat and died mysteriously a year later. But no evidence stuck. Jill Heinerth, after filming a documentary, Ben's Vortex, changed her mind. She thought I wasn't in the cave, but my maps convinced her I'd burrowed deep, panicked, and died in a hidden pocket. Ed Sorensen disagreed. If I say he's not in there, he's not in there. My father found a note in my things, thanking my family, hinting I might have planned to end it all. But the cave gave no answers. I'm still here, somewhere, not in the cave, not on land. The shadow took me, or I became it, trapped in a place where the water never clears, where the tunnels loop forever. Every night I swim, my lights long dead, my tanks empty, the shadows whisper, my only companion. Vortex Spring isn't just a cave, it's a mouth, and it's still hungry. If you dive there, listen closely. You might hear me calling from the dark. Story 3. The Sterkfontein Descent. My name is Peter Verhulsel, and this is the story of how I came to know the true meaning of darkness. It was September 29th, 1984, when I set out with two friends, Mark and Johan, to dive into the Sterkfontein caves near Johannesburg. The caves were a labyrinth of limestone carved out over eons, their underwater passages twisting like the veins of some ancient beast. We were experienced divers, or so we thought, drawn to the thrill of mapping the uncharted depths of Milner Hall's underground lake. The plan was simple: follow the guideline, measure the lake's depth, and get out. But the caves had other plans for me. The air was cool that morning, a sharp contrast to the heat outside. We suited up, checked our tanks, and clipped our lights to our belts. The guideline, a thin, sturdy rope, was our lifeline, meant to guide us through the murky water and back to the surface. I remember the weight of my gear, the familiar heft of my tank, and the flicker of excitement in my chest as we descended into the cave's mouth. The entrance was a jagged maw, swallowing us whole as we slipped beneath the water surface. The lake was a void. My light cut through the silt, revealing little more than a few feet of rocky walls and sediment clouds. We moved in single file, Mark leading, Johan in the middle, and me at the rear. The guideline was taut in my hand, a reassuring tether in the darkness. But as we went deeper, the walls seemed to close in, the passages narrowing until they felt like they were pressing against my shoulders. I couldn't help it. My curiosity stirred. Side tunnels branched off, their black mouths whispering secrets. What was down there? Just a quick look, I thought. I'd catch up. I let go of the line. The first time I veered off, I swam into a narrow tunnel, my light bouncing off jagged limestone. The water was colder here, the current sluggish. I turned back after a minute, my heart pounding, and found Mark and Johan waiting. their eyes sharp with warning through their masks. I grabbed the guideline again, nodding an apology. We pressed on, the lake deepening, the pressure building in my ears. But those side passages kept calling, their darkness tugging at me like a current I couldn't resist. The second time, I drifted toward another tunnel, this one wider, its walls glistening with mineral deposits. I told myself I'd only go a few feet. My light caught something, a strange formation, maybe a stalactite, and I swam closer. The guideline slipped from my fingers again. This time, when I turned back, Mark was there, his hand grabbing my arm, pulling me back to the line. His glare said enough. "Stay with us." I nodded, my breath heavy in my regulator, and we continued. But the caves were alive in a way I couldn't explain. They seemed to shift, to breathe, to lure me deeper. The third time, I didn't even think. A narrow crevice caught my eye, barely wide enough for my shoulders. I let go of the line and swam into it, my light flickering as silt swirled around me. The tunnel twisted, then split into a maze of smaller passages. I turned, expecting to see the guideline, but there was only darkness. My heart lurched. I swam back, or what I thought was back, but the walls had changed. The guideline was gone. Panic clawed at my chest. I forced myself to breathe slowly, to conserve air. My light swept the walls, searching for the rope, but every tunnel looked the same. I was lost. My tank gauge showed less than half remaining. I couldn't afford to keep swimming blindly. Then, through the haze, I saw it. A faint shimmer above. An air pocket. I kicked upward, breaking the surface into a small chamber. A dry sandbank no bigger than a car. I climbed out, my legs shaking, and ripped off my mask. The air was cold, damp, stinging my lungs, but I was alive. I checked my tank. Barely enough for a short dive. Going back into the water was suicide without the guideline. My light was dimming, the battery draining faster than I'd expected. I sat on the sand, the cave silence pressing against my ears. The darkness was absolute, a weight that seemed to crush my thoughts. Mark and Johan would get help, I told myself. They'd seen me veer off. They'd come back with rescuers. All I had to do was wait. Hours passed, maybe days. Time blurred in the dark. My stomach growled, a dull ache that grew sharper with each passing moment. I had water, dripping from the cave walls, cold and metallic, but no food. My light died after what felt like a day, leaving me in blackness so complete I couldn't tell if my eyes were open or closed. I tried to keep my mind sharp, counting my breaths, tracing the edges of the sandbank with my fingers, but the cave was relentless. It whispered in the silence, in the drip of water, in the faint rustle of something moving just beyond my reach. I started talking to myself, my voice hoarse against the stone. I spoke to Shirley, my wife, imagining her face, her laugh. I spoke to my mother, apologizing for every reckless choice I'd ever made. The hunger was a beast now, gnawing at my insides. My body felt lighter, weaker, as if the cave was draining me. I scratched at the sand, writing messages to keep my mind from unraveling. "I love you, Cheryl and Ma," I carved with a rock, the words uneven but deliberate. If I didn't make it, maybe someone would find them. The cold was worse than the hunger. It seeped into my bones, making my joints ache. I curled up on the sandbank, my wetsuit offering little warmth. My thoughts grew sluggish, fragmented. I dreamed of light, of open sky, of food, simple things like bread or fruit. But the cave swallowed those dreams, replacing them with shadows that moved in the corners of my mind. I heard sounds, scrapes, echoes, faint voices, rescuers, or the cave playing tricks. I shouted until my throat burned, but no one answered. Days bled into weeks. I lost track of time entirely. My body was a stranger now, frail and trembling. The sandbank was my world, a tiny island in an endless sea of stone. I wrote another message in the sand, my fingers shaking. I'm sorry to have caused you all this trouble. I'll see you again in 40 days. I don't know why I wrote it. Maybe a flicker of hope, or maybe just delirium. The words felt final, like a goodbye I wasn't ready to say. I thought about the guideline, that thin rope I'd let slip. One mistake, one moment of curiosity, and now I was here, trapped in the earth's belly. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd always been a risk taker, chasing the next thrill, the next uncharted corner. But the caves didn't care about my experience or my courage. They were indifferent, eternal, and I was just a speck in their vastness. The hunger became a dull hum, less urgent but ever present. My body was shutting down, conserving what little energy it had left. I lay on the sand, staring into the dark, my breath shallow. I thought of the divers who'd passed so close. 40 yards, I'd later learn. They'd been right there, their lights cutting through the water, their voices muffled by the stone. But I couldn't hear them, and they couldn't hear me. The cave had sealed me away, a secret it refused to share. I don't remember the end. Maybe I slept. Maybe I just faded. The last thing I recall is the sand beneath my fingers, cool and grainy, and the weight of the darkness pressing down. I wasn't afraid anymore. The cave had taken that too. All that was left was a quiet acceptance, a surrender to the earth. When they found me, 6 weeks after I'd vanished, my body was still on that sandbank, curled up like a child. The autopsy would say I lasted 3 weeks, surviving on nothing but water and will. They found my messages, scratched into the sand, a final testament to a life cut short by one reckless choice. The Sterkfontein caves were closed to divers after that, their depths left unmeasured, their secrets locked away. I became a cautionary tale, a name whispered among cavers, a reminder of what happens when you let go of the line. The darkness doesn't forgive. It waits. Story 4. The Mammoth Cave Expedition. My name is Sam, and I'm not sure why I'm writing this. Maybe it's to make sense of what happened, or maybe it's to warn anyone foolish enough to think a weekend speedlunking in Mammoth Cave is just a fun adventure. My friends, Ben, Luke, Jared, and Ellie, and I thought the same. We were wrong. It was late summer, the kind of sticky Kentucky heat that makes you crave shade. The 5 of us, all in our mid-20s, had been planning this trip for months. Mammoth Cave National Park was a bucket list destination for us, a chance to test our nerve in the world's largest known cave system. We were no strangers to outdoor adventures, hiking, climbing, even some amateur caving. But Mammoth was different. Over 400 miles of mapped tunnels and rumors of countless more unmapped, twisting beneath the earth. The park rangers warned us to stick to guided tours, but we wanted the real thing, a raw, unfiltered descent into the dark. We'd done our research, packed our gear, headlamps, ropes, carabiners, first aid kits, and found a lesser-known entrance on the north side of the park, one the rangers didn't advertise. The cave mouth was a jagged scar in the hillside, half hidden by ferns and crumbling limestone. We stood there, backpacks heavy, the air cool and damp as it spilled out from the darkness. Ellie, always the boldest, grinned and said, "This is going to be epic. Ben adjusted his headlamp, muttering about how we better not get lost. Jared, the quiet one, just stared into the black, his face unreadable. Luke clapped me on the shoulder, his usual cocky smirk in place. "Ready to conquer the underworld, Sam?" We descended single file, the tunnel sloping sharply. The air grew colder, the walls slick with moisture. Our headlamps cut narrow beams through the gloom, illuminating jagged stalactites in the uneven floor. The cave was alive with sound, distant drips, the faint rustle of bats, and our own footsteps echoing like whispers. For the first hour, it was thrilling. We navigated tight squeezes, ducked under low ceilings, and marveled at cathedral-sized chambers where our lights barely reached the roof. Ben kept cracking jokes about cave monsters, and Ellie teased him for being spooked. It felt like an adventure, just as we'd imagined. Then Ben disappeared. We'd stopped in a wide chamber to catch our breath, our lights sweeping the walls to check for side passages. Ben had been right behind me, fiddling with his pack. I turned to ask him something, and he was gone. No sound, no warning, just an empty space where he'd been standing. "Ben?" I called, my voice bouncing off the stone. Nothing. Ellie shone her light around, her grin fading. "Ben, quit messing around," she shouted. Luke and Jared joined in, their calls overlapping, but the cave swallowed their voices. We searched every corner of the chamber, checked the tunnel we'd come through. No footprints, no dropped gear. It was like the cave had eaten him. Panic crept in, cold and heavy. We decided to backtrack, thinking maybe he'd doubled back without us noticing. But as we moved, a sound stopped us dead. A faint, desperate whisper echoing from a side tunnel we hadn't explored. "Sam, help!" It was Ben's voice, unmistakable, weak and trembling. My heart lurched. Luke's eyes widened. "That's him," he said, pointing to the tunnel. "But that's not where we came from." Against every instinct, we followed the voice. The tunnel was narrow, forcing us to crawl single file, our knees scraping the rough stone. The air grew colder, the walls tighter, like the cave was closing in. Ben's voice kept calling, fainter each time, always just out of reach. "Sam, please." It felt wrong, like chasing a ghost, but we couldn't stop. Ellie was shaking, her light jittering across the walls. Jared was silent, his face pale. Luke kept muttering, "This doesn't make sense." After what felt like hours, the tunnel opened into a massive chamber, the floor dropping away into a yawning pit. Our lights barely touched the bottom, maybe 50 feet below. Luke leaned forward, shining his headlamp down, and froze. "Oh, God," he whispered, his face draining of color. I followed his beam, and my stomach twisted. There, sprawled on the jagged rocks below, was Ben. His body was broken, limbs bent at unnatural angles, blood pooling beneath him. His headlamp was shattered, his eyes staring blankly up at us. Ellie stifled a scream. Jared backed away, shaking his head. No, that's not possible," he stammered. "He was with us. How did he get down there?" I couldn't speak, my mind racing. Ben couldn't have fallen there. We'd been together, moving as a group. There was no way he could have gotten ahead of us, let alone fallen into a pit we hadn't even reached. Unless something had lured him. Before we could process it, another sound cut through the silence, a voice, low and taunting from the tunnel behind us. "Come on, guys. This way." It was Jared's voice, but not quite right. Like a warped recording, hollow and mocking. Jared was standing right next to me, his eyes wide with terror. "That's not me," he whispered, his voice barely audible. We spun our lights toward the tunnel, and for a split second I saw it, a pale, humanoid shape at the edge of our beams. Its skin was chalky, almost translucent, stretched tight over a gaunt frame. Its eyes were solid black, like twin voids, and its mouth twisted into a grotesque smile. A rasping laugh echoed, mimicking Jared's voice perfectly before it darted back into the dark. Ellie screamed, dropping her light. Luke grabbed her arm, yelling, "We need to move now!" We ran, our lights bouncing wildly, the cave a blur of stone and shadow. My heart pounded, my breath ragged. The tunnel seemed to twist and narrow, the walls pressing closer. Behind us, the laughter followed, sharp and relentless, mixed with whispers of our names. "Sam, Ellie, keep going." It wasn't Jared's voice anymore. It was all of ours, layered and distorted, like the cave itself was mocking us. We stumbled into another chamber, smaller, with multiple exits. Jared was lagging, his face gray, sweat dripping from his brow. I can't keep up," he gasped. Before we could stop, he tripped, sprawling across the floor. His light rolled away, casting wild shadows, and then we saw it again. The creature, crouching at the edge of the chamber, its black eyes locked on Jared. It moved like a spider, too fast, too fluid, and in an instant, it was on him. Jared screamed, a raw, guttural sound, as it dragged him backward into the dark. His light flickered out, and his scream cut off abruptly. Ellie was sobbing, clinging to Luke. I grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the nearest tunnel. "We can't stop," I said, my voice shaking. Luke hesitated, staring at where Jared had vanished. "We can't leave him," he said, but the fear in his eyes betrayed him. Another laugh echoed, closer now, and that was enough. We ran again. The cave seemed to fight us, the tunnels twisting illogically, the air growing thinner. My legs burned, my lungs ached, but the creature's whispers never stopped. Luke, Ellie, Sam. It was everywhere, behind us, above us, in the walls. At one point we passed a crumpled shape on the ground. Jared, his body twisted like a discarded doll, his eyes wide and lifeless. Ellie screamed again, and Luke pulled her away, his face grim. We kept running, the tunnels a maze of terror. Luke was slowing, his breathing ragged. "Keep going," he panted, but as he spoke, his foot caught on a rock. He stumbled, and before I could grab him, the creature was there. Its pale hand shot out, impossibly long, wrapping around Luke's legs. He screamed, thrashing, his light swinging wildly. "Sam, help!" he cried, but the thing was too fast. It yanked him backward, his body vanishing into the shadows. His scream echoed, then stopped. I grabbed Ellie's arm, dragging her forward. "Don't look back," I said, my voice hoarse. We ran, the creature's laughter chasing us, our lights flickering as the batteries weakened. The tunnel narrowed, forcing us to crawl, the stones scraping our skin. Ellie was sobbing, her movement sluggish. I can't do this," she whispered. "You have to," I said, pulling her along. But as we crawled, I felt it, a cold, bony hand brushing my ankle. I kicked wildly, my light swinging, and caught a glimpse of those black eyes inches from my face. I screamed, shoving Ellie forward, and scrambled after her. The tunnel opened into a small chamber, and I saw it, a faint glow ahead, the promise of daylight. "Go!" I shouted, pushing Ellie toward the light. She stumbled, crawling faster, and I followed, the creature's rasping breath right behind me. The tunnel widened, the air warming, and suddenly we were out, collapsing onto the grass under a blinding sun. Ellie was shaking, her face streaked with tears. I looked back at the cave mouth, expecting to see that thing emerge, but it was just darkness. We staggered to the ranger station, my mind numb. I told them a half-truth. We'd been attacked. Our friends were lost. They sent search teams, combed the tunnels for days. They found Ben's body at the bottom of that pit, just as we'd seen him. Luke and Jared were never found. The rangers asked questions I couldn't answer, their eyes skeptical. I didn't tell them about the creature, the voices, the eyes. They wouldn't have believed me. Ellie doesn't talk about it. She moved away, cut contact. I don't blame her. I see those black eyes every time I close mine, hear that mocking laughter in every quiet moment. I don't go near caves anymore. I don't trust the dark. Something's still down there, waiting, and I know it hasn't forgotten my name. Story 5. The Nutty Putty Nightmare. My name is John Edward Jones, and what started as a thrilling adventure in Utah's Nutty Putty Cave in late 2009 became the most terrifying ordeal of my life. I'm telling you this now, trapped in the suffocating dark, because I need someone to know what happened. How a simple caving trip turned into a nightmare I couldn't escape. It was supposed to be a fun outing, a chance to explore the twisting tunnels of Nutty Putty with my brother Josh and a few friends. I'd always loved caving, the way the earth swallowed you whole, the cool air brushing your skin, the thrill of squeezing through passages barely wide enough for a body. Nutty Putty was infamous among cavers, a labyrinth of tight squeezes and hidden chambers, but I was no novice. At 26, I was fit, experienced, and ready for the challenge. My wife and kids were waiting for me back home, expecting me to return with stories of adventure. I never imagined I'd end up fighting for my life in a crevice so tight it would become my prison. We started early that day, the November air crisp outside the cave's entrance. The group descended, our headlamps slicing through the pitch black. The cave was a maze of slick, clay-lined passages, some so narrow you had to exhale to slip through. We laughed and joked at first, our voices echoing off the walls. Josh led the way, his lanky frame navigating the turns with ease. I followed, my heart pounding with excitement as we ventured deeper, about 400 feet into the earth. The cave was alive, its walls glistening with moisture, its silence heavy with secrets. Then we reached the birth canal, a notorious passage known for its brutal tightness. It was a slot barely 18 inches wide and 10 inches high, a cruel test of nerve and body. I'd heard stories about it, cavers getting stuck, panicking, turning back, but I was confident I could handle it. I lay on my stomach, arms stretched ahead, and began to inch forward, the walls pressed against my shoulders, my hips, my chest. I exhaled hard, willing my body to shrink and push deeper. The clay was cold and slick, gripping my skin like a vice. I wriggled forward, my headlamp casting wild shadows until I felt the passage tilt downward. That's when it happened. I slipped. My body slid head first into a steeper, narrower section of the birth canal. I tried to brace myself, but the clay was too slippery. My shoulders jammed against the walls, and my arms were forced beneath my chest, pinned by the unyielding rock. I was stuck upside down in a space so tight I could barely breathe. My headlamp flickered, illuminating the suffocating walls just inches from my face. Panic clawed at me, but I forced it down. "Josh!" I called, my voice muffled. "I'm stuck." Josh's face appeared above me, his headlamp blinding. "Hold on, John, we're going to get you out." he shouted, his voice tight with fear. I could hear the others scrambling, their boots scraping against the cave floor. I tried to move, to shift my weight, but every twitch made the walls feel tighter. My chest was compressed, each breath a shallow gasp. Gravity pulled at my body, pooling blood in my head, making my pulse throb in my ears. I thought of my wife, my kids. Their faces flashed in my mind, grounding me. I had to stay calm. I had to get out. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Josh and the others called for help, and soon voices echoed through the cave. Rescuers, dozens of them, descending with ropes and pulleys. I could hear their urgency, the clatter of equipment, the shouted plans. A woman's voice reached me, calm but strained. "Hi, John. I'm Susie. We're here to help. Just hang on." I managed a weak reply, my voice hoarse. "Hi, Susie. Thanks for coming. I really want to get out." She chuckled softly, but I could hear the worry beneath it. They tried everything. Ropes were looped around my legs, pulleys anchored to the cave walls. I felt tugs on my body, sharp and jarring, but the clay was treacherous. The walls sheared the ropes, anchors popped free, and every attempt failed. My body ached, my muscles screamed from the strain of being pinned upside down. The angle was killing me. Blood rushed to my head, my heart struggled against gravity's pull. I could feel my strength fading, but I kept talking to the rescuers, desperate to stay connected. "Tell my wife I love her," I whispered to one. "Tell my kids I'm trying." Hours passed. 5, 10, 15. The cave grew colder, the air thicker. My headlamp dimmed, plunging me into near darkness. I could hear the rescuers above, their voices growing frantic. They tried a new pulley system, more robust, but the cave fought back. A rope snapped, and I felt my body shift slightly, the walls gripping tighter. Pain shot through me, and I gasped, my lungs burning. I was exhausted, my thoughts fogging. The rescuers kept working, their hands reaching for me, their voices urging me to hold on, but I was slipping. By the 20th hour, my body was betraying me. My heart pounded erratically, each beat a struggle. The rescuers were close now, their lights flickering above, but the passage was too narrow, the clay too slick. I could hear Josh's voice, hoarse and desperate, calling my name. I wanted to answer, to tell him I was still fighting, but my words were weak, barely a whisper. "Save me," I breathed, thinking of my family, for my wife and kids. The cave was relentless. It held me like a predator, its walls unyielding. I thought of the open sky, the warmth of home, the laughter of my children. I clung to those images, but they were fading, swallowed by the dark. The rescuers tried one last time, a final pulley system, but the anchors failed again. My body was numb, my breaths shallow. I could feel my heart slowing, each beat weaker than the last. After 27 hours, the fight was over. My heart gave out, the strain too much. I felt myself drift, the pain fading, the voices above growing distant. The cave claimed me, a tomb I'd never escape. They sealed Nutty Putty after that, my body still inside, a grim reminder of the earth's power. I was supposed to be home for Thanksgiving, sharing stories with my family. Instead, I'm here, my voice echoing in the dark, hoping someone hears my story. Story 6, The Diver's Desperate Choice. My name is Miroslav Kukliš, though they call me MK down here in the Adriatic, where the sea whispers secrets to those who dare listen. It's September 10th, 2002, and I'm staring into the mouth of a cave beneath the waves off Sholta Island. Croatia. The water is calm, a deceptive mirror reflecting the fading light of dusk. My dive gear feels heavy, the regulator a cold weight against my lips. The bay of Poganica is quiet, save for the soft lapping of waves against our boat. My two companions, fellow divers, check their equipment nearby, their movements methodical but tense. We've heard the stories about this cave, its labyrinthine tunnels, its unforgiving depths. At 177 feet, it's a beast that swallows the unprepared. But I'm not unprepared. I've dived deeper, darker places, or so I tell myself. The plan is simple. Descend to the cave's entrance at 54 meters, explore the main gallery, and follow the guideline back out. My dive computer hums softly on my wrist, tracking depth and air. The oxygen tank strapped to my back is full, enough for an hour if I'm careful. My knife, clipped to my belt, glints in the dim light. A tool, not a weapon. I nod to my partners, and we slip into the water. The sea embraces me, cold and unyielding, pulling me down as I kick toward the cave's maw. The descent is smooth at first. My fins cut through the water, and the world above fades into a distant memory. At 30 meters, the light dims, the surface a faint shimmer. By 50 meters, it's gone entirely, replaced by an inky blackness that presses against my mask. My torch cuts a narrow beam through the void, illuminating the cave's entrance, a jagged wound in the seafloor. The guideline, a thin rope anchored to the rock, stretches into the darkness. I clip my carabiner to it, a lifeline to the world above. My partners follow, their lights dancing like fireflies in the abyss. Inside the cave, the walls close in. The main gallery is wide enough to move comfortably, but the rock is sharp, etched by centuries of currents. My breathing is steady, the hiss of my regulator a metronome in the silence. I check my dive computer, 54.1 meters, air at 180 bar. Plenty of time. I push deeper, following the guideline as it snakes through the tunnel. The cave is alive in its own way. Stalactites hang like teeth, and the water feels thicker, as if it's watching me. My torch catches glints of movement, tiny fish darting into crevices, their eyes reflecting my light. At 60 meters, the tunnel splits. The guideline veers left into a wider gallery, but a narrower passage beckons to the right. My partners signal to stick to the plan, but curiosity tugs at me. I've heard of air pockets deeper in these caves, hidden chambers where the sea relents for a moment. I gesture that I'll take a quick look, just a few meters. They hesitate but nod, their lights bobbing in agreement. I unclip from the main guideline and swim into the narrow passage, my torch illuminating walls that seem to pulse with the sea's heartbeat. The passage tightens, forcing me to twist my body to fit. My tank scrapes against the rock, a grating sound that echoes in my ears. The water grows colder, or maybe it's my imagination. My dive computer beeps. 65 meters, deeper than planned. Air at 140 bar. I should turn back, but the passage widens slightly, and my torch catches a shimmer ahead. An air pocket. My pulse quickens. I push forward, squeezing through a final constriction. The chamber opens around me, a dome of rock with a glassy ceiling of trapped air. I surface into it, my head breaking into a pocket no larger than a coffin. The air is stale, heavy with the scent of stone and salt. I pull my regulator from my mouth, gasping. The space is barely enough to turn around, but it's a reprieve from the crushing weight of the sea. My torch sweeps the walls, revealing nothing but smooth rock. No exit, no continuation. A dead end. My dive computer beeps again, insistent. Air at 100 bar. I've burned through too much, too fast. The narrow passage back to the main gallery will take time to navigate, and my partners are waiting. I take a final breath of the stale air and dive back into the water, my torch guiding me to the passage's mouth. But something's wrong. The guideline I followed in, it's gone. I sweep my torch, searching for the rope, but the rock walls stare back, blank and unyielding. My heart pounds, a dull thud in my chest. I must have missed it in the dark. I backtrack, my fins kicking up silt that clouds the water. The passage feels different now, tighter, as if the cave is closing its jaws. My torch beam wavers, or maybe it's my hand shaking. Air at 80 bar. I force myself to slow my breathing, but the regulator feels sluggish, each inhale a labor. The walls seem to shift, the passage forking where I don't remember a fork. Left or right? I choose left, praying it leads back to the main gallery. The tunnel narrows again, my tank scraping louder now. The sound a scream in the silence. My torch catches a flash of rope, the guideline. I reach for it, but my fingers close on nothing. It's just a trick of the light, a shadow on the rock. My dive computer screams 60 bar. Panic claws at me, a cold hand squeezing my lungs. I'm lost. The cave has swallowed me, and I'm running out of air. I kick harder, desperate to find the main gallery. The water is a haze of silt now, my torch barely piercing it. My regulator sputters, each breath thinner than the last. Air at 40 bar. I'm at 70 meters, deeper than I should be. The cave is a maze, a living thing that shifts to trap me. My mind races, images flickering, my partner's lights, the boat above, the surface so far away. I try to calm myself, but the darkness is inside me now, a weight heavier than the sea. I find another chamber, smaller than the first, with a sliver of air at the top. I surface, gasping, my regulator dangling uselessly, air at 20 bar. The pocket is tiny, barely enough to keep my head above water. My torch flickers, the battery dying. I fumble for my knife, the blade cold against my palm. The cave is silent, but it's watching, waiting. I can feel it. My dive computer beeps its final warning. 10 bar. Minutes left, maybe less. The walls seem to close in, the water rising to meet the rock above. I'm trapped, a rat in a cage. My breaths are shallow, each one a struggle. The torch dies, plunging me into blackness. The sea is a void, endless and hungry. I clutch the knife, its weight the only real thing left. My mind screams for a way out, but there's none. The cave has won. I think of the surface, of air and light. But they're a dream now. My body shakes, cold seeping into my bones. The knife trembles in my hand. I don't want to drown, to feel the water flood my lungs, to thrash in the dark as the sea claims me. The blade is sharp, its edge a promise of control. One quick motion and the panic could end. One choice, and I could escape the agony. I press the knife to my chest, the point biting through my wetsuit. My heart pounds against it, a drumbeat, counting down. The cave is silent, but it's alive, its walls whispering my name. Miroslav, M.K., the diver who went too deep. I close my eyes, though it makes no difference in the dark. The blade presses harder, a sharp pain cutting through the numbness. I don't know how long I sit there, the knife a cold weight against my heart. Seconds, minutes. Time means nothing here. The air pocket shrinks, or maybe I imagine it. My regulator is useless now, the tank empty. The sea presses in, a lover's embrace, unyielding and final. I make my choice. The knife moves, a swift arc, and pain blooms hot and bright. Blood warms my chest, mixing with the cold water. I gasp, the air pocket offering no solace now. The cave watches as I sink, the knife still lodged in my chest. My body drifts, weightless, the sea cradling me as my vision fades. The darkness is complete, a blanket over my eyes. I think of the surface one last time, but it's too far, too late. The cave has claimed me, a silent testament to my desperate choice. Days later, they find me. My body, buoyant with death, surfaces in the cave's mouth, the knife, a grim marker of my final act. The investigators piece it together. Dive computer data, the cave's cruel layout. They call it suicide, a choice to escape the terror of drowning. But the cave knows better. It knows the truth of those final moments, the horror that drove me to the blade. It holds me still in its depths, a secret it will never tell. Story 7. Boesmansgat's Final Promise. I'm Dave Shaw, a technical diver who spent years chasing the thrill of the deep, where the world fades to black and every breath is a calculated risk. Boesmansgat, a water-filled abyss in South Africa, was my obsession in 2004. They call it Bushman's Hole, the deepest cave of its kind, a 900-foot plunge into the Earth's gut where light doesn't dare go. I'd trained for this, planned every move, every tank switch, every second of decompression. My goal was simple: break a record, touch the bottom at 876 feet, and come back alive. But the cave had other plans for me. October 2004. The descent was like falling through ink. My torch cut a feeble path through the murk, silt swirling like ghosts around me. At 800 feet, my body screamed under the pressure, lungs tight, regulators hissing with every breath. I was alone, tethered to the surface by a thin guideline, my only way back. At 876 feet, I hit the bottom, a silty, uneven floor littered with debris. My torch swept across it, and that's when I saw him, a skeleton lying on its back, perfectly preserved in the cold, oxygen-starved water. His dive mask was still in place, straps tangled around bare bone, no flesh, just a grim outline of what used to be a man. My heart slammed against my ribs. I knew who this was, Deon Dreyer, a 20-year-old diver who'd vanished here in 1994, 10 years lost in the dark. I hovered there, staring, my breath loud in my ears. I wasn't prepared for this. No one was. I tied a reel to him, a thin line connecting Deon to the world above, marking him found after a decade of silence. The ascent took 10 hours, each decompression stop an eternity. When I surfaced, I faced Deon's parents. Their eyes were hollow, carrying a grief that hadn't faded in 10 years. I told them I'd found their son. I told them I'd bring him back. It was a promise I didn't think through, born in the heat of the moment, but it sank into me like a hook. I couldn't leave him down there. January 2005. I planned the deepest recovery mission ever attempted. Don Shirley, a friend and expert diver, joined me. We mapped it out for weeks. Tanks, lines, a body bag for Deon's fragile remains. The cave was unforgiving. One mistake could trap us both. At 873 feet, the pressure is crushing. The cold bites into your bones, and the dark feels alive, watching. We knew the risks. I didn't care. I'd made a promise. The dive began at dawn. The surface water was warm, deceptive, but as we descended, the temperature plummeted. My suit pressed against my skin, the weight of the gear dragging me down. Don stayed higher, managing the guideline while I pushed deeper, my torch beam slicing through the blackness. At 600 feet, the cave walls seemed to pulse, narrowing around me. My breathing quickened, the hiss of my regulator louder than my thoughts. I was alone again, just me and the abyss. At 873 feet, I found Deon exactly where I'd left him. His skeleton lay still, the reel I'd tied months ago taut in the current. I clipped my own line to it, securing myself, and started working. The body bag was tricky to maneuver, my gloved hands fumbling in the cold. I had to cut Deon free from the silt and gear that had settled around him. My knife was sharp, but the task was slow, each movement kicking up clouds of silt that blinded me. My torch flickered, low battery maybe, or something else. The cave didn't want to let him go. My chest tightened. I was breathing too fast, burning through my air. I checked my gauges. Oxygen levels dropping quicker than planned. I needed to slow down, but Deon's remains were brittle, crumbling at the touch. I couldn't rush this. My knife caught on a strap and I tugged harder, too hard. The line I'd clipped to him jerked, tangling around my leg. I froze. A rookie mistake, one I'd never have made on the surface. The cave was messing with me, clouding my mind. I twisted to free myself, but the line tightened, snaring my arm now. My torch dimmed again, the beam stuttering. Panic clawed at me. I was at 873 feet, deeper than anyone should be, and I was stuck. My regulator hissed louder, each breath shallower. I yanked at the line, but it only tightened, wrapping around my chest like a python. My vision blurred, not from silt, but from my own body failing. I was overexerting, my muscles screaming for oxygen I didn't have. The camera on my helmet was still recording. I didn't know it then, but it caught everything. My hands clawing at the line, my knife slipping from my grip, my body thrashing in slow motion. I saw Deon's mask in front of me, empty eye sockets staring back. For a moment, I swore he moved, his bony hand twitching toward me. My mind was slipping, the narcosis setting in. The cave was alive now, whispering in the dark, its voice the sound of my own ragged breathing. I tried to signal dawn, but my arms were heavy, my thoughts sluggish. The line was a noose now, pinning me to the bottom. My torch went out completely. Blackness swallowed me. I felt it, the cave claiming me just like it had claimed Deon. My last thought was of the promise I'd made. I'd told his parents I'd bring him home. I didn't know it would cost me everything. I don't know how long I was out. Time doesn't exist down there, but I wasn't alone anymore. Something was with me in the dark, not Don, not Deon, but something else. A presence, cold and heavy, pressing against me. I couldn't see it, but I felt its weight, its intent. It wasn't angry, it was patient, like it had waited 10 years for me to come back. My body was shutting down, my lungs burning, but my mind was sharp, too sharp, seeing things that weren't there. Or maybe they were. Deon's skeleton was closer now, inches from my face. His mask gleamed in the dark, though my torch was dead. I swore I saw his jaw move, a silent scream. My own scream was trapped in my throat, drowned by the regulator. The line tightened again, pulling me down into the silt, as if the cave itself was dragging me under. I fought, my hands tearing at the line, but it was useless. My air was gone, my vision tunneled to a pinprick. Then, silence. No hiss of the regulator, no thud of my heart, just the cave, endless and eternal. I was part of it now, tethered to Deon, both of us lost in the dark. But the presence didn't leave, it stayed, watching, waiting for the next diver foolish enough to challenge Boesmansgat. They found us later, me and Deon, tangled together at the bottom. Don and the rescue team risked everything to bring us up. My camera told the story. A man fighting a promise he couldn't keep, a cave that never lets go. I'd wanted to bring Deon home, and in a way I did. But Boesmansgat took me in his place. The cave keeps its secrets, and now I'm one of them. The surface world moved on. Deon's parents buried their son, their grief finally given a shape. But I can't leave. I'm still down here in the silt and the dark, where the pressure never eases and the cold never fades. The cave doesn't forget. It waits, patient and hungry, for the next soul to make a promise it can't keep. Every now and then I feel it, that presence again moving through the water. It's not Deon, it's something older, something that's always been here. It knows my name now. It knows I tried to take what belonged to the cave, and sometimes, in the endless black, I swear I hear it whisper, "You're mine." Story 8, The Descent into Devil's Arse. My name is Thomas Reed, and I was 22 when I decided to chase the unknown beneath the earth. It was 1959, and the Peak Cavern in Castleton, known to locals as the Devil's Arse for its gaping maw and eerie moans, called to me like a siren. I'd been caving before, small, safe tunnels with mates. But this was different. The cavern's uncharted depths promised adventure, and I was arrogant enough to think I could conquer them. My mates, Charlie and Edward, were just as eager, their eyes gleaming with the thrill of the unexplored. We had ropes, a battered radio, a few torches, and a ladder we'd cobbled together from scrap. It was enough, we thought. The March air was sharp. As we stood at the cavern's entrance, a black void that seemed to swallow the daylight. The wind howled through the opening, a low groan that made the hairs on my neck stand up. Charlie clapped me on the shoulder, his grin wide. "Ready to meet the devil himself, Tom?" he teased. I laughed, but it was hollow. Something about the cave felt wrong, like it was watching us. We descended, our boots crunching on loose shale. The main chamber was vast, its walls glistening with damp stalactites hanging like jagged teeth. Our torches cast long, flickering shadows that danced across the stone. We'd studied the maps, crude sketches from older cavers, and knew of a narrow shaft, barely explored, that dropped deeper than anyone had dared. They called it the Needle's Eye, an 18-inch crevice that twisted into the Earth's core. That was our target. The air grew heavy as we reached the shaft's entrance, a jagged slit in the rock barely wide enough for a man. I went first, my pride outweighing my nerves. I tied the rope around my waist, Edward feeding it from above, and squeezed into the crevice. The walls pressed against my chest, cold and unyielding, scraping my skin through my jacket. My breath came in shallow gasps, the air thick with the smell of wet stone and something sharper, like decay. I inched downward, the ladder creaking under my weight, its rungs biting into my palms. "All right down there, Tom?" Edward's voice crackled through the radio, distorted by the stone. "Yeah," I lied, my voice steady despite the tightness in my chest. "It's narrow, but I'm fine." The crevice tightened further, the walls closing in like a vice. My shoulders brushed rock on both sides, and I had to exhale to slide lower. Then, halfway down, my foot slipped. The ladder shifted, jamming against the walls with a grinding screech. I tried to move, but my hips were caught, the rock gripping me like iron. Panic clawed at my throat. I pushed upward, but the ladder wouldn't budge, and neither would I. "Tom, you good?" Charlie's voice now, fainter, more urgent. "I'm stuck," I said into the radio, trying to keep calm. "The ladder's jammed. Can you pull me up?" They tried. I felt the rope tug, but it didn't give. The crevice was too tight, the ladder too wedged. I heard them cursing above, the rope jerking against my waist. Then a snap. The rope broke, frayed by the jagged rock. I dropped a few inches, the ladder groaning beneath me. My heart pounded, the walls seeming to close in tighter. "Hold on, mate," Edward called. "We're coming down." Minutes dragged like hours. My torch flickered, the beam growing weak. The air felt wrong, heavy with a strange acrid tang. Methane, I realized later, seeping from the depths. My head began to swim, thoughts blurring at the edges. I tried to focus, but my mind wandered. I imagined myself back at the pub, laughing with Charlie and Edward, the world above bright and warm. "We should just climb out," I mumbled into the radio, my voice slurring. "Grab a bite, yeah?" "Tom, stay with us." Charlie's voice was sharp, but it sounded far away. They came down, their boots scraping above. Edward's face appeared in the dim light, pale and strained. "We're going to get you out," he said, but his eyes betrayed his fear. They tied another rope, thicker this time, and pulled. The ladder shifted slightly, but the rock held fast. My chest ached, each breath harder than the last. The air was thick now, my vision spotting with black. Hours passed, or was it minutes? Time lost meaning in the dark. My torch died, plunging me into blackness. The radio crackled with Edward's voice, but I couldn't make out the words. My limbs grew heavy, my mind drifting to impossible things. Sunlight, open fields, my mother's voice calling me home. I tried to speak, but my tongue felt thick. "I'm sorry," I whispered to no one. A new sound broke through, a distant rumble, like thunder underground. Water. The cave was flooding. A storm, they said later, had turned the cavern into a death trap. I heard Charlie shout, his voice raw with panic. "We have to go, Tom! The water's coming!" I wanted to tell them to leave, to save themselves, but my voice failed. The cold crept in, numbing my fingers, my thoughts. The last thing I felt was the rope going slack, the sound of splashing water fading above me. The walls held me like a lover, tight and unyielding as the darkness took over. They came back, I learned later, when the flood receded. But I was gone, my body still in the needle's eye. My father, broken by grief, ordered the shaft sealed, my resting place marked with loose rocks and a simple inscription, Thomas Reed, lost to the deep, 1959. The cave kept me, as it had always meant to, its cold heart claiming another fool who thought he could defy it. Story 9. The Bones in the Dark. My name is Jack, and I'm a spelunker. Not the kind who just wanders into tourist caves with polished handrails and gift shops. No. My team, Josh, Mia, and Eli, prided ourselves on finding the untouched, the unmapped, the places where the earth still held secrets. We'd charted dozens of caverns across the state, each one a puzzle of stone and shadow. But last summer, we found something in the deep dark that changed us forever. This is my story, told as it happened, moment by moment, because I need to get it out before the memory eats me alive. It started with a tip from a local geologist about a cave system in the northern hills, a jagged scar of limestone cliffs no one had fully explored. The entrance was a narrow fissure, barely wide enough for a person to slip through, hidden behind a curtain of thorny brush. We geared up, helmets, headlamps, ropes, carabiners, and drove out at dawn. The air was heavy with the scent of pine and damp earth as we hiked to the site. Mia, our map maker, was already sketching the approach, her pencil scratching against her notebook. Josh, built like a linebacker, carried the heaviest gear, grinning like always. Eli, the quiet one, checked our ropes with meticulous care. Me, I was the one who always went first, the one who couldn't resist the pull of the unknown. The fissure swallowed us one by one. Inside, the air turned cold, thick with the mineral tang of wet stone. Our headlamps cut through the darkness, revealing a tight passage that sloped downward. We crawled single file, the walls scraping our elbows, until the tunnel opened into a wider chamber. Stalactites hung like jagged teeth above, dripping water that echoed in the silence. "This is it," I said, my voice bouncing off the walls. "Virgin territory?" Mia's eyes gleamed with excitement as she unrolled her graph paper. Josh clapped me on the shoulder. "Let's make history, Jack." We descended deeper, rappelling down a series of drops. The cave system was a labyrinth, with passages branching like veins. Hours passed as we mapped, our headlamps painting fleeting arcs of light. The deeper we went, the stranger the cave felt. The air grew heavier, almost oppressive, and the walls seemed to pulse with a faint vibration, like the earth itself was breathing. Eli noticed it first. "You hear that?" he whispered, pausing to adjust his headlamp. I stopped, listening. A faint hum, low and rhythmic, barely audible. "Just water moving somewhere," I said, but my gut twisted. It didn't sound like water. We pressed on, dropping into a massive chamber easily the size of a gymnasium. My headlamp swept across the floor and I froze. Bones, piles of them, antlers, ribs, skulls, scraps of hide, and clumps of what looked like rotted flesh strewn across the stone like some grotesque collection. The air reeked of decay, sharp and sour. Mia gagged, covering her mouth. Josh's grin vanished. "What the hell is this?" he muttered. Eli crouched near a pile, his gloved hand hovering over a cracked femur. "These aren't old," he said. "Some of this is fresh." A chill settled over us. The chamber was silent except for our breathing, which echoed too loudly in the vast space. I swung my light toward the walls, revealing side tunnels, narrow, shadowed niches that looked like dens. Each one I checked was empty, but the darkness beyond seemed to swallow the light, hiding whatever lay deeper. "This feels wrong," Mia said, her voice barely above a whisper, "like a horror movie set." I wanted to laugh it off, to break the tension, but the words stuck in my throat. Then it came. A sound from one of the side tunnels, a guttural rustle like something heavy dragging across stone. It was followed by a low, inhuman growl that vibrated in my chest. My heart slammed against my ribs as I spun my headlamp toward the noise. 4 glowing yellow eyes stared back from the blackness, unblinking, suspended in the void. At the edge of the beam I saw it, a pale, hunched figure, maybe 4 feet tall, its skin chalky and hairless, sinewy limbs coiled like it was ready to spring. Its face was disturbingly human, but wrong, with huge oval eyes and a lipless mouth stretched wide. Before I could react, it let out a screech that pierced my skull, a sound like metal tearing. It charged, moving with a jerky, unnatural speed, followed by another smaller shape from the same tunnel. 2 more emerged from the opposite side, their eyes glinting in the dark. They shuffled forward, claws scraping the stone. "Run!" I shouted, my voice cracking. We bolted for the rope we'd anchored at the chamber's entrance, our gear clattering. Josh, always the protector, turned and tackled one of the creatures, slamming it against the wall with a sickening crunch. It shrieked, thrashing, its claws raking the air. I reached the rope first, my hand shaking as I clipped in and started climbing. Below, the creature's yelps and screeches filled the chamber, a chaotic chatter that didn't sound like any animal I knew. Mia and Eli were right behind me, their headlamps bouncing wildly. Josh was last, his heavy breaths punctuated by curses as he hauled himself up. I heard the flesh-slapping echoes of the creatures below, their claws scrabbling at the rocks as they tried to follow. My arms burned, but I didn't stop until I reached the top, tumbling out into the sunlight. I collapsed on the rocks, gasping, my heart still pounding. Mia and Eli emerged moments later, their faces pale and streaked with sweat. Josh pulled himself out last, his jacket torn, blood seeping from gashes on his arm. We sat there trembling, the sun warm on our skin, but doing nothing to chase away the cold inside. My forearms stung, and I looked down to see deep, jagged cuts I didn't remember getting. Dark, ink-like fluid oozed from them, not quite blood. "What were those things?" Mia whispered, her voice shaking. None of us had an answer. We hiked back to the truck in silence, every rustle in the brush making us flinch. At the hospital, they cleaned my wounds, but the tests came back strange. The doctor's face was grim as he explained the DNA in the fluid from my cuts didn't match any known species, only showing faint similarities to great apes. "Unknown animal attack," the report said, but they found no bodies in the cave when they sent a team to check. The passage we'd climbed out of was empty, the bone piles gone, like they'd never been there. We didn't talk about it much after that. Josh's arm healed, but he wakes up screaming some nights. Mia burned her maps and quit caving. Eli barely speaks anymore, his eyes always darting to the shadows. Me? I can't sleep without seeing those glowing eyes, hearing that screech, the cuts on my arm scarred over, but they itch sometimes, like something still inside me. We never went back to that cave. We don't need to. Whatever those things were, they're still down there waiting in the dark. The weeks that followed were a blur of nightmares and paranoia. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, convinced I heard that guttural rustle in my apartment. I started checking the locks 3 times before bed, keeping a flashlight by my pillow like it could protect me. The others were no better. Josh called me once, his voice hoarse, saying he'd seen something pale move past his window at night. Mia texted me a photo of her old gear, ropes, carabiners, her helmet, piled in a dumpster. "I'm done," she wrote. Eli just stopped answering altogether. I tried to move on, to focus on work, but the cave followed me. I'd be typing at my desk, and my scars would throb, the skin around them prickling like it was alive. One night, I woke to a scratching sound at my window. My heart stopped as I grabbed the flashlight and pointed it outside. Nothing. Just the empty street below. But when I checked the glass, there were faint, claw-like marks etched into it, too high for any animal to reach. A month later, I got a package in the mail. No return address, no note. Inside was a single bone, small and polished, like a finger. It smelled faintly of rot, the same stench from the cave. I threw it out, but the next day, another arrived, then another. I stopped opening them, piling the boxes in my closet, but the smell seeped through, clinging to everything. I started sleeping with the lights on. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I drove to the cliffs, alone, my flashlight and a crowbar in hand. The fissure looked smaller than I remembered, almost hidden, like the earth was trying to forget it. I stood there for an hour, staring into the dark, listening. No rustle, no growl, just silence. But as I turned to leave, my flashlight caught something on the ground, a fresh pile of bones arranged in a neat circle with a single claw mark scratched into the dirt beside it. I haven't been back since. Some nights, I swear I hear that screech in the distance carried on the wind. It's calling me back, and I'm terrified that one day I'll answer. Story 10. The Whispering Cavern. I have always been a treasure hunter, not by trade but by obsession. By day, I'm just Eli, a clerk in a dusty coastal shop selling trinkets to tourists who think seashells are exotic. But when the sun dips below the horizon, I'm out there, scouring forgotten beaches, combing through tide pools, and prying into crevices where the sea hides its secrets. The locals call me reckless, say I tempt fate by wandering too close to the cliffs at night. They're not wrong, but I've never cared. There's something alive in the hunt, the pull of the unknown, the promise of something valuable buried in the sand or stone. That night, though, I found more than I bargained for. The storm came in fast, the kind that churns the sea into a frothing beast. Rain lashed the cliffs, and the wind howled like a living thing. I was out on Blackthorn Beach, a stretch of jagged rock and seaweed where no one sensible goes after dark. My boots crunched over shells as I swept my battery-powered torch across the shore. The beam caught something glinting half buried in a tangle of kelp. A solid gold coin, heavy and cold in my hand. Its surface was etched with a face, an ancient king maybe, but warped, like the die had been struck wrong. The eyes were too large, the mouth too wide, almost sneering. I should have stopped there, pocketed it, and gone home. But greed's a funny thing, it makes you stupid. The locals had whispered about a cave nearby, one that only opened at the lowest tide. They said it held treasures from shipwrecks, maybe even older things, but no one ever went in. They guard their own, they'd mutter, crossing their arms. I didn't believe in their stories, but that coin was real, and it felt like a key. The tide was low, the cave mouth gaping like a wound in the cliff. I climbed over the rocks, the storm's roar drowning out my thoughts. That's when the wave hit. It came out of nowhere, a monstrous wall of water cresting the cliffs. It slammed into me like a fist, crushing the air from my lungs. I felt my ribs crack, sharp and searing, and my ankle twisted under me with a sickening snap. The sea dragged me under, tossing me like driftwood. I clawed at nothing, my mouth filling with salt. I don't know how I didn't drown right then. When I came to, I was sprawled on a slick stone ledge at the cave's mouth, cold spray licking my legs. My torch, miraculously still clipped to my belt, flickered weakly. The coin was still clutched in my fist, its edges biting into my palm. The cave stretched before me, black and endless. Behind me, the tide roared, creeping closer with every wave. I couldn't stay there. If the water rose, it'd swallow me whole. My chest screamed with every breath, and my ankle wouldn't hold my weight. I crawled, dragging myself over the jagged stone, the coin tucked into my pocket. The cave smelled of rot and salt, and the air was thick, like breathing through a wet cloth. My torch beam danced across the walls, catching glints of quartz and something else, strewn debris, old fishing tackle, frayed nets, splintered driftwood, and then Near my foot, a cracked cat skull, its empty socket staring up at me. I froze. Something about it felt wrong, like it was watching me. I reached out, my fingers brushing its brittle surface, and yanked my hand back. A warning, maybe. My pulse hammered in my throat. The water was at my knees now, cold and relentless, pushing me deeper into the cave. I didn't want to go, but I had no choice. Drowning wasn't an option I could stomach. I dragged myself forward, every movement a fresh spike of pain. The tunnel narrowed, the walls closing in until I could touch both sides without stretching. The torch flickered, its battery dying, and I cursed under my breath. The tide's roar was fainter now, but I could still feel its pull, like the cave itself was breathing. Then I heard it, a sound that wasn't the sea or the wind, a low, wet rasp, like someone trying to breathe through a clogged throat. It came from deeper in the cave, echoing off the walls. I stopped, my torch beam shaking in my hand. The light barely reached the next chamber, but I saw something. Movement, just beyond the edge of the dark. I told myself it was a trick of the light, a shadow cast by the water, but the sound came again, closer, deliberate. My skin prickled, cold sweat mixing with the seawater soaking my clothes. I didn't want to move, but the water was rising, lapping at my thighs. I had to keep going. The next chamber was wider, the ceiling lost in shadow. My torch caught two small pillars, natural formations maybe, but they looked carved, too precise. Between them, something crouched. 4 glowing black eyes stared at me unblinking like polished obsidian. My breath caught and I swung the torch up. The light hit it, a pale humanoid thing, squat and hunched on all fours. Its skin was slick, almost translucent, stretched tight over bones that didn't sit right. Its teeth gleamed, too many, too sharp, splitting its face in a rubbery grin. It moved, one jerky step forward, and I swear its face looked almost human. Too human. I stumbled back, my broken ankle screaming, and fumbled for the hunting knife strapped to my belt. The thing didn't lunge, didn't scream, just watched, its head tilting at an angle that made my stomach lurch. The water was at my waist now, and the tide's pull was stronger, dragging at my legs. I slashed the knife through the air, a pathetic warning, and the creature's grin widened. It took another step, its claws scraping the stone. I turned and ran, or tried to. Running wasn't the word for it. I clawed my way back through the tunnel, half crawling, half staggering, the pain in my chest and ankle blinding. The creature's shrieks followed me, high and jagged like breaking glass. The tunnel seemed longer going back, the walls tighter, the water higher. My torch flickered out, plunging me into darkness. I moved by feel, my hand scraping over sharp rock, my breath coming in ragged sobs. The shrieks grew fainter, but I could still hear that wet rasp, like it was right behind me. I don't know how long I crawled. Minutes, hours. It felt like forever. The air grew colder, the water shallower, and then I saw it, a faint gray light ahead, the cave mouth. I stumbled out into daylight, collapsing on the rocky shore. The storm had passed, leaving a sky the color of ash. I lay there gasping, my body a map of pain. The coin was gone, lost somewhere in the cave, maybe when I'd fallen or when I'd swung the knife. I didn't care. I could still hear the cave's whispers in my head, feel those black eyes boring into me. I dragged myself to my feet and limped away, not looking back. The sea could keep its treasures. I'd never go near that cave again. But the whispers didn't stop. At night, When I try to sleep, I hear them low, wet, rasping. Sometimes I wake up with salt on my lips, like I've been back in the cave. I don't hunt anymore. The cliffs, the beaches, the sea, they're not mine anymore. They belong to whatever lives in that cave, and it knows my name. Story 11. The Phantom of Twain Cave. My name is Clara, and I've always been drawn to the shadows of history, the places where whispers linger like damp air in forgotten corners. Growing up in Hannibal, Missouri, the Mark Twain Cave was more than a local landmark. It was a labyrinth of secrets, a place where the earth itself seemed to hold its breath. The stories about the cave were part of my childhood, like bedtime tales, only these were laced with dread. They spoke of Dr. Joseph McDowell, a man who, in the 1840s, turned the cave's twisting passages into a hidden laboratory for unspeakable experiments on stolen corpses. The most chilling tale was about his daughter, Amanda, whose body he preserved in a jar of spirits suspended from the cave's ceiling, believing he could still speak to her ghost. When townsfolk discovered her 2 years later, they buried her properly, but the cave never let her go. Locals swore her spirit haunted the tunnels, a spectral girl in a lace dress and cape, vanishing when approached. I thought they were just stories, until the summer of 1885, when I stepped into the cave and found out how wrong I was. It began with a dare. My friend Elias, a lanky boy with a penchant for trouble, bet me I couldn't spend a night in the cave alone. The wager was simple, a silver dollar, a fortune for a 17-year-old like me. I wasn't one to back down, especially not in front of Elias, whose smirk always seemed to challenge my nerve. So, on a humid July evening, I stood at the cave's entrance, a flickering lantern in one hand, a knapsack with a blanket and some bread in the other. The mouth of the cave yawned before me, its jagged edges resembling a skull in the fading light. The air was cool, heavy with the scent of wet stone. I glanced back at Elias, who waved mockingly from the hill above. "Don't let Amanda get you, Clara," he called, his voice echoing. I rolled my eyes and stepped inside. The cave swallowed the daylight instantly. My lantern cast a feeble glow, illuminating dripping stalactites and walls that glistened like the inside of a living thing. The path was narrow, the ground uneven, and every step echoed with a hollow drip-drip of water somewhere in the darkness. I'd been in the cave before, on guided tours with my family, but this was different. Alone, the silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional skitter of unseen creatures. I told myself I'd find a dry spot, sit for a few hours, and return at dawn to claim my prize. But as I ventured deeper, the stories I'd heard all my life began to creep into my thoughts. Amanda's ghost, the whispers of lost children, the cave's hunger for those who lingered too long. After an hour of walking, I found a small chamber where the path widened. The air here was colder, and my breath fogged in the lantern's light. I set my knapsack down and spread my blanket, trying to ignore the unease prickling my skin. That's when I heard it, a soft hum, like a lullaby, faint and distant. I froze, straining to listen. It wasn't the wind. There was no breeze this deep. The sound grew clearer, a child's voice, sweet and mournful, singing words I couldn't make out. My heart thudded. "Hello?" I called, my voice trembling. The humming stopped abruptly, leaving a silence so thick it felt like a weight. I held my lantern higher, its light catching on something ahead. A small, wet footprint on the dusty floor, too small to be mine. I should have turned back then. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but curiosity, that dangerous spark, pulled me forward. I followed the path where the footprint pointed, the tunnel narrowing until the walls brushed my shoulders. The humming resumed, closer now, and with it came a faint glow, not from my lantern, but from somewhere deeper in the cave. I rounded a bend and stopped dead. There, on a ledge, sat a girl. She was no older than 10, her long dark hair falling over a lace dress, a cape draped around her shoulders. Her skin was pale as moonlight, her eyes large and dark, fixed on me. She clutched a small lantern, its flame casting eerie shadows on the walls. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, her voice soft as a sigh. I stumbled back, my lantern clattering to the ground. Who are you?" I stammered. She didn't answer, only pointed down the tunnel, her expression unreadable. Then slowly she stood and glided toward the darkness, her lantern's light fading as if swallowed by the cave. I grabbed my own lantern, its flame miraculously still burning, and hesitated. The smart thing would be to retrace my steps, but the girl's presence felt like a summons. Against my better judgment, I followed. The tunnel twisted and dipped, the air growing colder with each step. The humming resumed, now joined by other sounds, faint giggles like children playing in the distance. My mind flashed to the story of the 3 boys who vanished in 1967, their laughter supposedly still echoing in the cave. I shook the thought away. That was decades in the future, a tale I couldn't possibly know. Yet the giggles felt real, bouncing off the walls, sometimes behind me, sometimes ahead. My lantern's light began to flicker, and panic clawed at my chest. I called out again, "Hello? Is anyone there?" No answer, only the giggles. Now closer, now farther, as if the cave itself were toying with me. The path opened into a vast chamber, its ceiling lost in shadow. Stalagmites rose like jagged teeth, and in the center, a pool of water gleamed, reflecting my lantern's weak light. The girl stood by the pool, her back to me. "You're close," she said without turning, "but you have to see." I stepped closer, my boots crunching on the gravelly floor. "See what?" I asked. She pointed to the pool, and I leaned over, my reflection wavering in the still water. But it wasn't just my face staring back. Another figure stood behind me, a boy, maybe 12, with wide, frightened eyes. I spun around, but no one was there. The water rippled, and when I looked again, the boy's reflection was gone. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice echoing. The girl turned, her eyes now glistening with tears. "Amanda," she said simply. My blood ran cold. Before I could speak, she stepped into the pool, her body dissolving into the water like mist. The giggles stopped, replaced by a low, rhythmic thumping, like a heartbeat pulsing through the rock. My lantern flickered again, and in its dying light, I saw more footprints, dozens of them, small and bare, circling the pool. They hadn't been there moments ago. I backed away, my breath hitching. The thumping grew louder, and shadows moved along the walls, shapes that weren't cast by my lantern. Figures emerged from the darkness. 3 boys, their clothes tattered, their faces pale and hollow. They didn't speak, only stared, their eyes pleading. I recognized them from the stories. Billy, Joey, and Craig, the boys who vanished. But how could they be here now in 1885? The cave seemed to twist time itself, pulling past and future into its depths. One of the boys raised a trembling hand, pointing to a narrow tunnel I hadn't noticed. "Go," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "She's waiting." I ran, my lantern swinging wildly, the shadows lunging as if to grab me. The tunnel was tight, the walls slick with moisture. My foot slipped on wet clay, and I caught myself against the rock, my hand brushing something soft, fabric, old and damp. I held up the lantern and saw a scrap of lace, like from a dress caught in a crevice. My stomach churned. The thumping grew louder, vibrating through my bones, and Amanda's humming returned, now a mournful wail. I stumbled forward, the tunnel sloping downward, the air so cold it burned my lungs. At the end of the tunnel was another chamber, smaller, its walls etched with strange, spiraling patterns that seemed to writhe in the lantern's light. In the center stood Amanda, her cape billowing, though there was no wind. Behind her, a deep crevice yawned, its edges jagged and black. "You saw," she said, her voice echoing inside my skull. "Now you know." I didn't understand, but the weight of her words pressed against me, heavy with sorrow. She stepped toward the crevice, and I saw, just for a moment, other figures behind her. Men and women, their faces gaunt, their eyes empty. Were they McDowell's victims, the ones he'd experimented on, or something older, bound to the cave long before his time? "Don't go," I whispered, though I didn't know why. Amanda paused, her head tilting. "I stay," she said. "You go." She raised her hand, and a gust of icy air pushed me back. My lantern went out, plunging me into darkness. I fumbled for matches, my hands shaking, but before I could light one, a faint glow appeared, a single wet footprint glowing faintly, leading back the way I'd come. Then another and another, forming a path. I followed, my heart pounding, the thumping fading behind me. The giggles returned, softer now, almost comforting, guiding me through the twisting tunnels. Hours later, or maybe minutes, time felt warped. I saw the faint outline of the cave's entrance. I stumbled out into the dawn, the air warm and heavy with the scent of grass. Elias was gone, the hill empty. I collapsed, my hands trembling, and noticed something in my knapsack. A small, damp piece of lace, identical to the one I'd found in the cave. I never told anyone what happened, not even Elias, who never spoke of the dare again. But I heard the stories grow in Hannibal, whispers of a girl who guides lost souls to safety or leads them deeper into the dark. I don't know what Amanda wanted me to see, but I know this. The cave holds more than ghosts. It holds time, pain, and secrets that cling like damp stone. And somewhere deep inside, Amanda is still waiting. Story 12. The Warning of M Cave. I'm not sure why I'm recording this. Maybe it's to make sense of what happened, or maybe it's just to warn whoever finds this. My name's Ethan, and I'm a hiker, a desert rat, the kind of guy who chases the horizon across Nevada's cracked, sun-bleached canyons. I've always been drawn to the stories out here, the whispers of ghost towns, lost mines, and things that don't quite add up. That's how I heard about M Cave, a legend born from a YouTube comment of all things, left by a guy named Kenny Veach. He said he found a cave in the desert, shaped like a perfect capital M, and when he got close, his body shook with some kind of unnatural vibration. People told him to stay away. One comment stuck out: "Don't go in. You won't get out." Kenny didn't listen. He went back in November 2014, and no one ever saw him again. They found his phone near an old mine shaft, but no cave, no body, no answers. The story hooked me. I had to find it. It was October 2025 when I set out. The desert was quiet that morning. the kind of quiet that makes your own breathing sound too loud. I'd packed light, water, a flashlight, a knife, a GPS, and my old video camera for proof. The coordinates I'd pieced together from forums and old posts weren't exact, but they pointed to a stretch of rocky hills about 20 miles from Sheep Range. The sun was barely up, painting the cliffs red, when I parked my truck and started hiking. The air smelled of dust and sagebrush, and the only sound was the crunch of gravel under my boots. I'd been walking for hours when I saw it. Tucked into a jagged outcrop, half hidden by a shadow, was a cave mouth shaped like a perfect M. My heart kicked up a notch. It was real. The rock around it looked wrong, too smooth, like it had been carved by something other than wind or time. I switched on my camera, the red light blinking as I narrated. This is it. M Cave, October 12th, 2025. I'm going in. As I stepped closer, my skin started to prickle, not like a chill, but something deeper, like my bones were humming. My camera flickered, the screen glitching for a second. I shook it off, chalking it up to nerves. The entrance was narrow, barely wide enough for me to squeeze through. I clicked on my flashlight, and the beam cut into the darkness, revealing a tunnel that sloped downward. The air inside was cool, heavy, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. I took a breath and stepped inside. The tunnel was tighter than I expected, the walls slick with some kind of mineral that glistened under my light. My boots echoed, too loud in the confined space. About 10 feet in, the humming in my body got stronger, like standing too close to a power line. My camera flickered again, the audio crackling with static. I stopped, checking the battery full. Weird. I kept going, the tunnel curving slightly to the left. Then I heard it, a low rhythmic thrum like a heartbeat in the stone. It wasn't loud, but it was everywhere, vibrating through the walls, the floor, my chest. I froze, my flashlight sweeping the tunnel. Nothing but rock. Just the wind, I muttered, but my voice sounded thin, swallowed by the dark. The tunnel opened into a small chamber, maybe 10 feet across. My light caught something strange on the far wall, a series of markings, not random scratches, but deliberate angular shapes, like a code I couldn't read. They seemed to pulse faintly, though that could have been my eyes playing tricks. The thrum was louder here, steady, almost hypnotic. I panned my camera across the chamber, my hands shaking slightly. "This is something else," I whispered into the mic. Then the light caught a glint on the floor. I crouched down, heart pounding. It was a phone, cracked and dusty, half buried in the dirt. I picked it up, brushing off the grime. The screen was dead, but I recognized the model, an old one, like something from a decade ago. Kenny's? My stomach twisted. That's when I felt it. A shift in the air, like the pressure changed. The thrum stopped, replaced by silence so thick it pressed against my eardrums. Then, from deeper in the cave, a sound, like a whisper, but not words. More like the hiss of air escaping or the rustle of something moving over stone. I swung my flashlight around, but the beam didn't reach far. The darkness seemed to push back, heavier than before. My camera glitched again, the screen flashing black, then white, then back to normal. "What the hell?" I muttered, smacking it against my palm. The whisper came again, closer this time, from the tunnel ahead. I should have turned back. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I'd come too far. I had to know. The tunnel sloped deeper, the air growing colder, the walls tighter. The whisper was constant now, a low overlapping murmur like voices just out of reach. My flashlight flickered, and for a split second I thought I saw something in the beam, a shadow, tall and thin, darting across the tunnel. I stopped, heart hammering. "Who's there?" I called, my voice echoing. No answer, just the whisper, louder, almost mocking. My camera was barely working now, the screen a mess of static, but I kept it rolling. If something happened, I wanted proof. The tunnel ended in another chamber, larger than the first. My flashlight swept across it, revealing more of those strange markings on the walls, glowing faintly now, unmistakable. In the center of the room was a raised platform like a slab of stone, smooth and polished. On it was a single object, a small metallic cylinder no bigger than a soda can, etched with the same angular patterns. The thrum was back, louder, syncing with my pulse. I stepped closer, unable to look away. The whispers were all around me now, not just in the air, but in my head, urging me to pick it up. My hand reached out, trembling, but something stopped me. A sudden, sharp pain in my chest, like a warning. I stumbled back, gasping. That's when I saw it. In the corner of the chamber, barely visible in the dim light, was a pile of gear, backpacks, water bottles, a broken flashlight, and something else. A jacket, torn and stained, with a name tag stitched on it. "Kate Veach!" My blood ran cold. I backed away, my flashlight shaking in my hand. The whispers surged, a cacophony now, angry, insistent. The cylinder on the slab began to glow, a faint, sickly green. My camera let out a high-pitched whine and died, the red light fading to black. I ran. The tunnel seemed longer going back, the walls closing in, the air thick and suffocating. The whispers chased me, overlapping, screaming in my head. My flashlight flickered, then went out, plunging me into darkness. I fumbled for the spare in my pack, my hands shaking so bad I nearly dropped it. When it clicked on, the beam caught something, a figure, just for a second, standing at the edge of the tunnel. It was tall, too tall, its limbs bent at wrong angles, its face, not a face, just a void where one should have been. I screamed, scrambling backward, my boots slipping on the slick stone. I don't know how I made it out. The M entrance was there, sunlight streaming through it like a lifeline. I burst into the desert, gasping, collapsing onto the sand. My pack was still on, but my camera was gone. I must have dropped it in the tunnel. The phone, Kenny's phone, was still in my pocket, though, its weight like a curse. I stumbled back to my truck, my body still humming, my ears ringing with echoes of those whispers. I drove straight to the nearest ranger station, babbling about the cave, the markings, the figure. They didn't believe me. They searched the area for days but found nothing. No cave, no M, just empty desert. They kept the phone, said they'd look into it, but their eyes told me they thought I was crazy. I'm back home now, but I'm not the same. The humming hasn't stopped. It's faint, but it's there under my skin, in my bones. At night, I hear the whispers again, faint, like they're calling me back. I see that figure in my dreams, standing at the edge of my vision, waiting. I've tried to find the cave again, scouring maps, forums, anything, but it's like it doesn't exist. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it only shows itself to those it wants. I'm not going back. I can't. But if you're reading this, if you're out there chasing the same stories I did, listen to me. If you find a cave in the Nevada desert, shaped like a perfect M, don't go in. You won't get out.